I grew my wife's dad's company to $100 M. Then he said, smiling, "Your replacement will take over." Imagine building an empire for 12 years, only to have everything ripped away from you in a single moment, betrayed by the very people you trusted. In today's story, I built my wife's father's $100 million company. Then he replaced me. Watch how one man loses everything, but discovers a shocking secret that turns the tables. Stay tuned to see how he fights back, because what happens next will leave you questioning everything. How far would you go to take back what's yours? Keep watching. For 12 long years, I had dedicated myself to building Sterling Enterprises into what it was today. It wasn't just a company, it was my life's work. Day after day, I poured my time, my energy, and everything I had into this business. Weekends, holidays, family events, all sacrificed in the name of success. I had worked tirelessly to turn this failing company into an empire worth $100 million. I wasn't just doing it for the paycheck. No, this was something far more personal. I was building something that had my name on it, even if no one else recognized that at the time. There were moments of doubt, moments where I thought about walking away, but I kept going. There was always another deal to close, another contract to sign, another challenge to overcome. Through the years, I earned the respect of employees and clients alike. I was no longer just the son-in-law working in the shadows of my father-in-law, Frank Sterling, the founder of the company. I had become a force to be reckoned with. Sterling Enterprises had transformed, and I had played the pivotal role in that transformation. Yet, somehow, none of that mattered to the people I thought cared about me the most. The night it all came crashing down, I was sitting at the grand dinner table at the Sterling estate, surrounded by family. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the soft hum of conversation, it was all just noise. It felt like a dream, like the calm before the storm, a storm I had no idea was brewing. I had just closed the biggest deal of my career, one that would solidify our position in the industry for years to come. The future seemed so bright, so secure. But in the blink of an eye, everything changed. Olivia, my wife of over a decade, sat across from me with a practiced smile on her face. I thought I knew her. I thought we were partners, equals in this journey. But that night, as her eyes met mine, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. She wasn't my partner. She was something else entirely. As she spoke those words, her voice smooth and rehearsed, it felt like the floor beneath me had just opened up. "Your place here is over," she said, the words cutting through the air like a knife. "My new husband will take over Sterling Enterprises." The room seemed to freeze, the laughter and conversation fading into the background. I felt my grip tighten on the silverware in my hand, but I forced myself to remain calm. I couldn't show them the depth of my shock. I couldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing how much it hurt. Frank, her father, seated at the head of the table, simply smiled in agreement. It was as if he'd just made another routine business decision. As if this was just another shift in the power dynamics of a family-owned company. I glanced around the table, taking in the faces of the family members who had no idea what was going on. Were they truly oblivious? Or had they simply chosen to remain silent, unwilling to challenge the patriarch's decision? Either way, it didn't matter. They all knew their place. They knew Frank's word was law, and I had been a fool to believe otherwise. In that moment, everything became clear. All the years of sacrifice, all the late nights, all the missed moments with my family, they meant nothing to them. I wasn't irreplaceable. I wasn't a partner in this business. I was just an employee, a pawn in their game. And as I looked at Olivia, really looked at her for the first time, I saw the truth. She had never fought for me. She had never stood up for me when her father made decisions that hurt us. She had simply played the role of the obedient daughter, letting her father decide everything for her. And now, she was letting him decide that I was no longer useful. She had traded me in for another man, a man who would take over what I had built. Not because I had failed, not because I had done anything wrong, but simply because I was no longer needed. I put my fork down gently, smoothing my napkin over my lap, all while maintaining the mask of control that had carried me through countless board meetings. I wouldn't react, not here, not now. They expected anger, they expected resistance. They expected me to protest, to fight for what I had worked so hard to build. But I saw the game they were playing. I saw it now, and I wouldn't play by their rules. I had been foolish to believe that loyalty meant something to them. But that was over. The moment Olivia spoke those words, everything changed. I sat in silence as the room filled with more laughter, more clinking glasses, more meaningless chatter. But to me, everything had gone silent. It was like a trap closing in around me, but I wasn't going to let them see it. I had built this company from the ground up. I had made it what it was, and they thought they could just hand it over to someone else while I walked away quietly. No. They were gravely mistaken. That night, as I sat alone in my study, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't let the sting of betrayal fester without doing something about it. I turned on the lamp, the dim glow illuminating the stacks of papers in front of me: financial records, contracts, agreements, proof of everything I had given to this company. I had been careful, strategic, and patient. I had seen how things were shifting in this family. I had seen the way Frank had always played the game. Loyalty was never a guarantee. In the end, the only person I could trust was myself. I combed through every document, every piece of information I could find. They thought they had outsmarted me, that I would just roll over and accept my fate. But I had already planned for this. I had already secured my position in the company with an ironclad agreement that gave me 65% of the shares. Not Frank, not Olivia, and certainly not Adam, the new husband they had picked out for her. As I leaned back in my chair, a cold smile crept across my face. They had underestimated me. And now, they were going to pay the price. They had thought I was just a workhorse, just a man who built their fortune. But they had forgotten one crucial thing: the horse they had ridden for all these years had learned to run without a rider. And I wasn't walking away. Not now, not ever. I stood up from my desk, filled with a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in years. This was my moment. This was the beginning of something bigger. I wasn't just going to fight for my company. I was going to take back what was mine. And I was going to do it on my terms. The war had begun, and I was ready to win. The moment those words left Olivia's mouth, the reality of the situation hit me like a freight train. "Your place here is over," she said. "My new husband will take over Sterling Enterprises." I couldn't even process them at first. Was this some kind of joke? A test of some kind? Surely, she didn't just say that. But the dead silence that followed, the way her father smiled in agreement, no. This wasn't a joke. It was a betrayal. It was the end of everything I had worked for, and I was left sitting there, paralyzed, as the life I had built for 12 years unraveled in front of me. I looked at Frank, my father-in-law. The man I had looked up to, the man I had worked so hard to impress, the one I had fought so many battles for, all those late nights, all those weekends, all the sacrifices for the company that he had built. But in that moment, all I saw was a man who thought of me as nothing more than a stepping stone, a tool he could use and discard when it suited him. His smile was cold, calculated, as if this was just another simple business transaction, another decision to be made without any regard for the man sitting across from him. I could feel my grip tighten on the silverware. I wanted to snap, to shout, to stand up and demand some kind of explanation. But I didn't. I refused to give them that satisfaction. I wasn't going to let them see how badly this hurt. I wasn't going to show weakness. My mind raced with anger, betrayal, and disbelief, but I kept my face neutral. I couldn't let them see it. Not here. Not now. I glanced around the table. The rest of the family continued chatting, oblivious to the storm that had just struck. They laughed, they clinked their glasses, they went on with their evening, as if nothing had changed. But I knew what had just happened. I was no longer the golden boy. I was no longer the man who had built the empire. I was just another pawn in their game. And Olivia, my wife, the woman I had trusted, the woman I had built this life with, had just thrown me away like yesterday's trash. She didn't even flinch when she said it. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts. She had made her choice. And it wasn't me. It was him. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. She was sitting there, calm, composed, as if this was all perfectly normal. But it wasn't normal. It wasn't right. How could she do this? How could she let her father take everything away from me, without a second thought? She had never fought for me. She had never stood up for me when Frank made decisions that hurt us both. She had always been the obedient daughter, letting him decide her fate. And now, She was letting him decide mine. She had chosen him over me. And in doing so, she had made me realize just how little she cared about the man who had spent his blood, sweat, and tears to build their fortune. The anger started to bubble up inside me, but I kept it in check. There was no room for anger in this moment. No room for reaction. I needed to be smart. I needed to think. I put my fork down gently, smoothing my napkin over my lap, keeping my eyes trained on the table in front of me. I refused to let them see how much this hurt. The conversation around the table continued, oblivious to the tension in the air. The clinking of glasses, the sound of people chewing, laughing, it all felt so distant. Like I was in a different world. A world where none of this mattered. But it did matter. This wasn't just some family squabble. This wasn't just another power struggle. This was my life. This was everything I had worked for. And they were just throwing it away, like it meant nothing. I forced myself to stay calm, to keep my emotions in check. I couldn't show them how much this hurt. I couldn't show them the depth of my betrayal. But inside, I was screaming. How could she do this? How could she let her father take everything I had built and hand it over to another man? To a man who had no right to it. To a man who hadn't sacrificed a single night, a single ounce of sweat to make this company what it was. The pain started to sting, but I buried it. I wouldn't let it control me. I wouldn't let it define me. Not now. Not here. Later that night, after the dinner had ended and everyone had gone home, I sat in my study, staring at the walls. The house was eerily quiet. The kind of quiet that makes everything feel worse. The kind of quiet where your mind won't stop running, where every thought feels like a storm. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't shut it off. I had to do something. I had to make a plan. I sat down at my desk and turned on the lamp. The soft glow illuminating the piles of papers in front of me, contracts, financial statements, agreements, the proof of everything I had done, the proof of everything I had built. I ran my fingers over the documents, remembering the countless hours I spent working late into the night, away from my family, away from Olivia, away from everything. I had given so much to this company. And now, it felt like it had all been for nothing. But I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let them take everything from me. Not without a fight. Not without making them see what they had done. I went through every document carefully, each contract, each financial record. I had to know what I was up against. I had to make sure I had everything I needed to protect myself. Frank had underestimated me. He had always thought I was just the son-in-law, the man who could be pushed around, the man who would never question his authority. But I had been patient. I had been biding my time, making sure that when the moment came, I would be ready. As I combed through the papers, I found what I was looking for: proof of my ownership. Proof that I wasn't just some employee. I had 65% of Sterling Enterprises. Not Frank, not Olivia, and certainly not Adam, the new husband they had chosen for her. No, the company was mine. It had always been mine, and now, I had the legal documents to prove it. A smile crept across my face, cold and calculating. They thought they could throw me away, but they had made a fatal mistake. They thought I was just the workhorse, the man who built their fortune while they took all the glory. But I wasn't just a workhorse. I was the one who had made the tough decisions. I was the one who had turned this company into an empire. And now, it was time to remind them of that. By 3:00 a.m., I had everything I needed. I stood up from my desk, the documents in my hand, a sense of determination building inside me. This wasn't just about revenge. This wasn't just about showing them how much they had wronged me. This was about taking back what was rightfully mine. I wasn't going to walk away quietly. No, I was going to fight. And when I won, I would remind them exactly who they were dealing with. The game had just begun, and I wasn't about to lose. Just when you thought the storm had passed. The real fight is only just beginning. Now that he's learned the truth about his power, what will he do next? Will he let them steal everything, or will he strike back with a vengeance? Do you think he'll outsmart his enemies or fall victim to their plot? Comment 1 if you think he has what it takes to win. Comment 2 if you think it's too late for him to make a comeback. The next morning, I woke up with a fire in my chest, a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't anger, although that had fueled me the night before. It wasn't pain, though the sting of betrayal still lingered beneath the surface. No, this was something different. This was a calculated resolve, the kind of determination that had driven me to build Sterling Enterprises into the empire it had become. But now, that same empire was slipping through my fingers, and I wasn't going to let it go without a fight. I sat at my desk in the dim light of my office, staring at the files in front of me. The same contracts, the same agreements that I had poured my blood, sweat, and soul into. They had thought I was just a figurehead, just someone who had been along for the ride. But I wasn't. Not anymore. I had built this company. I had turned it from nothing into something, and I wasn't about to let them take it from me without reminding them just who had been in control all along. I reached for my phone and dialed my lawyer's number, feeling the weight of the situation settle over me. I had been patient for too long. Now, it was time to act. Get the executive shareholders agreement, I said, my voice steady. I need it now. I knew the game they were playing. I knew that Frank, my father-in-law, was already preparing his next move. But what he didn't know was that I was one step ahead. The documents I held in my hands weren't just for show. They were my trump card. As I waited for the lawyer to send over the files, I thought about the night before. Olivia's cold, rehearsed words, the way she had turned her back on me without a second thought. It wasn't just her betrayal that hurt. It was the realization that I had never truly been her equal. She had always been under the thumb of her father, never willing to stand up for me, never willing to challenge him when it mattered. And now, she was content to let him replace me with someone else, a man who had never earned his place in the company, who had never worked for it. I shook my head, pushing those thoughts aside. This wasn't about Olivia anymore. This was about me. This was about protecting everything I had built, everything I had sacrificed. I couldn't let them win. Not like this. The lawyer's message came through, and I opened the file with a sense of urgency. I scrolled through the document, my eyes scanning the fine print, looking for the one thing I needed. And there it was. The clause that gave me the legal right to block any transition of power within the company without my approval. I wasn't just a figurehead. I was the majority shareholder. I had control, and I wasn't going to let Frank or anyone else take that away from me. A sense of satisfaction washed over me as I leaned back in my chair, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. They had underestimated me. They thought I would just walk away, quietly defeated. But I had spent years watching, learning, waiting. I had never been just an employee. I had always known that one day, I would have to protect what I had built. And now, that day had come. The clock struck 9:00 a.m., and I stood up from my desk. The time had come. I walked through the halls of Sterling Enterprises, my steps deliberate, my mind sharp. I knew what was waiting for me in the boardroom. I knew that Frank had already begun rallying the troops, preparing his allies for the showdown that was coming. But what he didn't know was that I had already secured the support I needed. I had made sure that my control over the company was ironclad. When I arrived at the boardroom, I could feel the tension in the air. The executives were already gathered, some with uncertain expressions, others with looks of outright concern. The whispers had already started. They knew the shift in power was coming. They knew the family had been in disarray, but they didn't know what to expect from me. I walked into the room, my presence filling the space. The silence was palpable, everyone waiting for me to speak. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I didn't need to. We need to discuss the future of this company, I said, my voice cutting through the stillness. And I'll tell you right now, there's no transition of power happening. Not unless it's approved by me. The room shifted, a ripple of confusion and disbelief sweeping through the executives. I saw Frank's face harden, his mask of composure faltering for a moment. The man who had built this company, who had thought he could control every aspect of it, was now faced with a reality he hadn't prepared for. His eyes met mine, but for the first time, I saw something I had never seen in him before. Fear. "This is ridiculous," Frank muttered, his voice low but laced with anger. "You don't have the authority to make that decision." I held up the executive shareholders agreement, the one document that changed everything. "I do," I said, my tone unwavering. "This document states that any transfer of power requires my approval, and I'm not approving it." The room fell silent again, but this time, it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of realization. Frank's face turned red with frustration, but he knew it. He knew he was cornered. I wasn't just the son-in-law anymore. I wasn't just the guy who had built the company from the ground up. I was the one who held the power now. I turned to Olivia, who had been standing quietly at the back of the room. Her eyes were wide, her expression unreadable, but I could see the flicker of something behind her eyes: fear, regret, maybe even guilt. But it didn't matter, she had made her choice. And now, it was too late to change it. I've built this company, I said, my gaze never leaving her. I've spent 12 years making it what it is today. And if you think for 1 second that I'm going to let you hand it over to someone who hasn't earned it, you're gravely mistaken. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She just stood there, frozen, caught between her father and her husband, two men she could no longer control. Frank opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off. You have two choices, I said, turning my attention back to him. You can cooperate with me, or you can leave this company and never come back. The tension in the room was unbearable. The board members shifted in their seats, clearly unsure of what to do. But they didn't need to decide. I had already made my move. Frank hesitated, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an ally. But no one spoke. The silence stretched on, heavier than ever. Finally, Frank stood up, his jaw clenched, and stormed out of the room. Olivia followed him, but not before casting one last glance at me, her face a mixture of shock and disbelief. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle. I had done it. I had taken control. But this was just the beginning. I had won the first battle, but I knew Frank wouldn't give up that easily. He had spent decades building his empire, and I had just torn it down in one fell swoop. But I wasn't going to let him regroup. I wasn't going to give him the chance to take back what was mine. As I sat back down at the head of the table, I looked around at the executives, who were still processing everything that had just happened. They knew the power had shifted. They knew that the future of Sterling Enterprises was now in my hands. And if they were smart, they would follow my lead. Because I wasn't about to stop until I had everything I wanted. The day after the showdown in the boardroom, I sat in my office, the weight of what had happened still pressing down on me. The victory was sweet, but it was only the beginning. I had secured control over Sterling Enterprises, and Frank had walked away humiliated. But I knew better than to think the battle was over. Frank had spent decades building his reputation, surrounding himself with powerful allies, people who feared him, people who owed him. I had made my move, but I had no illusions about the kind of fight I was about to face. This wasn't going to be some easy victory lap. Frank wasn't the type to lie down and accept defeat. No, he would fight back, and he would do it in ways I hadn't even anticipated. By mid-morning, I had already received word that Frank had begun to make calls, rallying his old associates, gathering support to take back what I had taken from him. I could almost hear his voice, the venom dripping from his words, as he promised the world to anyone who would listen. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the fact that I had the legal leverage, the control, the power. And I wasn't going to let go of it. Not now, not ever. My phone buzzed on my desk, and I picked it up, not bothering to glance at the screen. Danielle, the first said, knowing it was her. What's the situation? The board is divided, she said, her voice calm but laced with a hint of concern. Some are still loyal to Frank, and he's promising them positions, bonuses, whatever it takes. He's trying to push back, trying to create a narrative that you're reckless and unstable. He's making his move, but he's not in the position he thinks he is. I sat back in my chair, staring out the window at the city below, my mind racing. I knew Frank would do this. I knew he would try to turn the tables, try to twist the narrative to his favor. But he had no idea what I had in store for him. I wasn't just playing the game, I was controlling it. Get me everything on him, I said, my voice sharp. Every connection, every financial backdoor, every person he's tried to manipulate over the years. We need leverage. Danielle hesitated for just a moment before responding. I've already started digging, she said. I'll have everything for you soon. I ended the call and leaned back in my chair, running my fingers over the edge of my desk. Frank thought he could outsmart me, that he could use his old tactics to win this fight. But what he didn't understand was that I had been watching him all along. Every step, every move, every deal he'd made in the shadows, I knew it all. I had carefully documented his financial misdeeds, his manipulation of board members, and the web of lies he had spun to maintain control. Frank wasn't just a businessman. He was a criminal, And now, I had the evidence to prove it. The hours seemed to stretch on as I waited for the information I needed, each minute ticking by slower than the last. My mind raced with the possibilities, the strategies I could use. I could feel the pressure building, but I knew I had to stay calm, stay focused. I couldn't let Frank see how close he was to losing everything. I had to play this smart. By 3:00 p.m., Danielle walked into my office, carrying a stack of documents. She placed them on my desk, and I immediately started scanning the pages. It was worse than I had imagined. The records were filled with discrepancies, hidden debts, and suspicious transactions that all pointed to one thing: Frank had been embezzling company funds, funneling millions into offshore accounts. "This is it," I said, my voice low as I ran my fingers over the papers. "This is the ammunition we need to take him down." Danielle nodded, her face serious. "If you release this, it's over for him. His entire empire will crumble. No one will want to work with him." I leaned back in my chair, my mind already working through the angles. The information I held was far more powerful than any legal agreement. If I exposed Frank's financial misdeeds to the board and the public, he would have no choice but to step down, his reputation ruined beyond repair. But I had to time it perfectly. I couldn't just throw this information out there recklessly. I needed to control the narrative, just as I had controlled the company. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting," I said, my voice cold with determination. "We're going to end this now." Danielle didn't ask any questions. She knew what needed to be done. She left the room to make the necessary arrangements. And I took a moment to let everything sink in. I had fought for this, I had bled for this company. I had sacrificed my time, my health, my family, and now I was going to make sure that no one could take it from me. Not Frank, not Olivia, no one. The board meeting was scheduled for 5:00 p.m. And by the time I arrived in the conference room, the tension was palpable. The board members sat around the table, some looking nervous, others unsure of what was coming. Frank's absence was deafening, but his presence still loomed over the room. I could see it in their eyes, the fear, the uncertainty. They didn't know which side to take. Some of them still felt loyalty to Frank, the man who had built the company, the man who had made them rich. But others had begun to see the cracks in his empire. They knew the tide was turning. I stood at the head of the table, the weight of the situation settling over me like a thick fog. "I've called this meeting today to discuss the future of Sterling Enterprises," I said, my voice firm, carrying through the room. "And I want to make it clear that this company is not going to be handed over to someone who has never earned it. Not to Frank, not to his replacement, and certainly not to anyone who thinks they can simply walk in and take what I've built." The board members exchanged looks, some shifting in their seats, others nodding along with what I was saying. But I could tell that Frank's loyalists were still hesitant. They still held on to the hope that somehow Frank would rise from the ashes, that his years of influence would be enough to regain control. I wasn't about to give them that chance. "You all know what's at stake here," I continued, pulling out the documents that would seal Frank's fate. "This is the truth. The evidence of Frank's actions, the financial mismanagement, the hidden accounts, the funds that have been siphoned off for his personal use. If you continue to support him, you will be complicit in his crimes. I'm giving you a choice: stand with me, or walk away." The room fell silent. The tension was suffocating, but I could feel the shift happening. I could feel the loyalty to Frank start to crumble, piece by piece. One by one, the board members began to speak up, siding with me, condemning Frank's actions. I wasn't just fighting for control of the company anymore. I was fighting for its integrity, its future. As the meeting went on, Frank's position became more and more untenable. His reputation was tarnished, his power stripped away. And in that moment, as I looked around the table at the faces of the men and women who had once been loyal to him, I knew this was my victory. The battle was over, and Frank had lost. The boardroom felt colder than usual as the minutes dragged on. My victory in the last meeting had been sweet, but it was only the beginning. Frank had already begun making moves to regain control of the company, and I knew I had to stay one step ahead. I had put everything I had into this company, and I wasn't about to let him or anyone else take it from me. I had seen the way Frank operated: smooth, persuasive, manipulative. He had spent decades surrounding himself with people who owed him favors, people who feared him, and respected him because of the power he held. I knew he would be reaching out to them, calling in all his debts to sway the board in his favor. The difference now was that I wasn't playing by his rules anymore. I had already made my move, and I had the leverage. But leverage only gets you so far in a fight for control. Now, it was time to finish what I had started. By 10:00 a.m., I was pacing in my office, waiting for the next move. Danielle had been working non-stop, gathering intel on Frank's allies, looking for any sign of weakness. She came in carrying a stack of files, his financial dealings, his connections, his influence, everything I needed to seal his fate. The information in those files was damning. If it got out, Frank would be done. But I knew I couldn't just release it recklessly. No, I needed to control the narrative. I needed to make sure that when Frank's empire crumbled, I would be the one standing tall. In full control, Danielle placed the files on my desk, her face grim. "They're gathering," she said, her voice low. "Frank's allies are making their move. They've started meeting with the board members, offering incentives, money, future positions, anything they think will sway the vote. They're trying to paint you as reckless, unstable, someone who can't be trusted with the company. They're setting up the narrative, trying to get ahead of the story." I leaned over the files, scanning the pages quickly. There it was, proof that Frank had been laundering money, funneling company funds into secret offshore accounts for years. I had known he was a crook, but the extent of his operations was even worse than I imagined. Frank had tried to keep everything hidden, but now, I had the tools I needed to bring him down once and for all. "Let's call a meeting," I said, my voice steady, despite the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "We need to get ahead of this. We'll use the evidence and frame the narrative on our terms. I'm not just going to play defense, I'm going to go on the offense." Danielle nodded without hesitation. "It's time to end this." The emergency meeting was set for 1:00 p.m. And when I walked into the boardroom, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Frank's loyalists were scattered around the room, their eyes shifting nervously as they waited for me to speak. I could see the fear in their eyes, but it wasn't fear of me, it was fear of what Frank would do when he realized he was losing. They all knew that when Frank's influence crumbled, their power would vanish too. They were all desperate to hold on, even if it meant aligning themselves with a man they knew was corrupt to the core. I stood at the head of the table, the silence in the room pressing down on me. "We're not here to discuss leadership transitions today," I said, my voice cutting through the air. "We're here to discuss the future of Sterling Enterprises, and whether we want that future to be built on corruption or on integrity. The choice is yours." I let my words hang in the air, knowing the gravity of the moment. The board members shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. I could see them weighing their options, deciding which side of the line they wanted to fall on. But none of them knew just how deep Frank's corruption went. None of them knew that I had the proof that could tear his empire apart. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the stack of documents that Danielle had prepared. I slid them across the table, one by one. As the board members began to flip through the pages, I watched their faces change. First, confusion. Then, disbelief. And finally, realization. "This," I said, my voice low but filled with purpose, "is what your beloved leader has been hiding from you. These are records of embezzlement, money laundering, illegal transactions, all funneled through offshore accounts. This is the truth. The man you've been protecting, the man who built this company, has been stealing from you. And if you continue to stand by him, you will be complicit in his crimes." The room went dead silent. I could feel the power shifting, the control slipping from Frank's hands. But I wasn't done yet. I knew this was the turning point. The moment when I could either gain everything or lose it all. Frank's most loyal board member, Richard, a man I had always respected, cleared his throat. "You're making a big accusation," he said, his voice tight. "You're saying Frank's been stealing from the company. Do you have proof?" I leaned forward, my eyes never leaving his. "Yes, I do," I said, pulling out a specific document from the pile. "This is a wire transfer of $12 million stat. Was transferred into an offshore account under Frank's name. It's all here, black and white. And if you think I'm lying, take it to your lawyers. But the truth is, Frank doesn't deserve your loyalty. He doesn't deserve to keep his position. And he doesn't deserve to run this company any longer." Richard opened his mouth to argue, but the words died on his lips. He looked down at the document. his face paling as the reality of the situation set in. He wasn't the only one. I saw the same reaction from the other board members. Some looked disgusted. Others looked frightened. But all of them knew one thing: Frank's time was over. "You have a choice," I said, my voice steady, commanding. "You can stand with a man who's been lying to you, or you can stand with me. I'm not just here to take his place. I'm here to ensure that Sterling Enterprises remains a company we can all be proud of. I'm here to protect this company from the damage Frank has done." The tension in the room was suffocating. No one moved, no one spoke, but I could feel the tide turning in my favor. Frank's empire was crumbling, piece by piece, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Finally, Richard spoke, his voice shaking. "You're right. I can't ignore this. I can't support someone who's been stealing from the company. Frank's actions are indefensible. I'm with you." One by one, the other board members spoke up, offering their support, until the room was filled with voices, all agreeing with me. I had done it. I had won. Frank's reign was over. But as I stood there, looking around at the faces of the people who had once been loyal to Frank, I knew the fight wasn't over. This was just the beginning. I had gained control of the company, but Frank would never give up so easily. He would come for me. He would try to take back what I had stolen from him. And when he did, I would be ready. But for now, I had secured my victory. And Sterling Enterprises was finally mine. The boardroom was finally quiet, but the weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. I had fought for control, and in that meeting, I had won. Frank's loyalists had turned their backs on him, and the evidence of his corruption was undeniable. The truth was out. There was no way for him to recover from the mess he had created. No way to salvage the empire he had spent decades building. He was finished, and Sterling Enterprises would never be the same again. Or so I thought. As the last of the board members filed out, their expressions still dazed from the truth they had just uncovered, I allowed myself a small moment of triumph. But only a small one. I had learned the hard way that success in this game was fleeting. Frank was a seasoned player, and I knew he wouldn't go down without a fight. In fact, I was sure that he had already begun planning his next move. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The victory in the boardroom was only one battle. The war wasn't over, not by a long shot. Frank's ego, his need to control, wouldn't let him simply walk away. He would rally his remaining allies, strike back in ways I couldn't yet anticipate. I had seen it in his eyes. He wasn't done yet. And I had to be ready for whatever he threw my way. I had learned early on in this business that you had to keep your enemies close, especially the ones who thought they were unbeatable. Frank thought he could control everything, but I had learned from him. I knew how to play the game. It wasn't enough to win one round. I had to finish it. The next morning, I was back at my desk, poring over the documents that had sealed Frank's fate. The financial records, the wire transfers, the proof of his manipulation, all of it was in my hands. And I knew that it was only a matter of time before someone would come after me. What Frank didn't know was that I had already planned for this moment. I had made sure that the information I gathered was airtight, beyond his reach, and I was prepared to use it to protect Sterling Enterprises from any threat that came our way. By 10 a.m., Danielle entered the office, her face tight with tension. "He's making moves," she said, setting a file down on my desk. "I just got word that Frank's lawyer reached out. He wants to meet." I couldn't help but laugh, a dark chuckle that surprised even me. "Of course he does," I said, shaking my head. "He thinks this is all some game he can still win." Danielle didn't share my amusement. "He's not done yet. He's trying to gather support from the few board members still loyal to him, making promises of a comeback. And from what I hear, he's already begun working the press. He wants to spin this as a hostile takeover, something he can frame as your fault." I rubbed my temples, feeling the weight of the situation sink in. Frank wasn't just fighting for his company. He was fighting for his legacy, and he would stop at nothing to protect it. He would twist the truth, lie, manipulate whatever it took to make it look like I was the villain in this story. And I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of playing that role. "Set up the meeting," I said, my voice calm but resolute. "Let's give him what he wants, but on my terms." Danielle didn't hesitate. She made the call. And within the hour, Frank's lawyer was sitting across from me in my office, his presence as imposing as ever. Frank wasn't there, but I knew he was watching. He was always watching, always lurking in the background, waiting for the right moment to strike. I couldn't let my guard down for even a second. "You wanted to meet," I said, leaning back in my chair, my hands steepled in front of me. "Here I am." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, clearly not used to this kind of direct confrontation. "My client, Mr. Sterling, believes that the recent developments are misinterpreted," he said, his voice smooth but with an edge of desperation. "He wants to resolve this matter amicably. He's willing to negotiate." I raised an eyebrow. "Amicably? Is that what you're calling it now? After everything he's done?" The lawyer hesitated but quickly regained his composure. "Frank is a businessman. He's built this company, and he's not going to let it fall into the wrong hands. He believes there's still room for reconciliation." I stood up, walking toward the window and looking out over the city. The skyline stretched before me, a reminder of everything I had worked for. "Tell Frank that I'm not interested in reconciliation," I said, my voice cold. "What he did, the lies, the manipulation, that's over. I'm in charge now. He can either accept that, or he can try to fight. But I won't back down." The lawyer swallowed hard, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was going. "I'll relay the message," he said, standing up quickly. "But you should know, Frank has connections. He won't go down quietly. He has a plan." I turned to face him, locking eyes with the lawyer. "Let him plan. I'm ready for whatever he throws at me." The lawyer left, and I sat back down at my desk, my mind racing with possibilities. Frank wasn't going to let this go. I knew that. But I wasn't going to give him the chance to tear down everything I had worked so hard to build. I would fight back, not just for Sterling Enterprises, but for everything it represented: the years of sacrifice, the late nights, the battles won. I looked down at the documents on my desk, feeling the weight of them in my hands. These weren't just pieces of paper, they were my shield, my weapon. With them, I could destroy Frank. With them, I could protect everything that mattered. But it wasn't just about the company anymore. It wasn't just about power or money. It was about proving that no one could take what was mine. I wasn't just going to protect my legacy. I was going to make sure no one could ever try to take it from me again. The war wasn't over. But this time, I was the one holding the cards. And I wasn't going to lose. The next few days felt like a never-ending storm. Frank's retaliatory moves had begun, just as I knew they would. The media was buzzing with rumors, and his lawyer was making his rounds, trying to plant seeds of doubt about my leadership. But I wasn't worried about the media. I wasn't worried about his lawyer. I had seen all this before. The way Frank operated: smooth, calculating, ruthless. He would do whatever it took to regain control of Sterling Enterprises. The only difference now was that I was the one with the power, and I wasn't about to let it slip away. By the time the emergency board meeting was scheduled, I knew exactly what was at stake. Frank wasn't just trying to win back the company, he was fighting for his legacy. For years, he had built an empire, but now, it was crumbling, and I was the one who held the pieces. The clock was ticking. The tension in the air was palpable as I walked into the boardroom, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The board members were already seated, their eyes flicking nervously toward me as I entered. No one spoke. They knew the stakes. They knew what had just happened. The last meeting had been a turning point, and Frank had lost. But he wasn't going down without a fight. As I stood at the head of the table, I couldn't shake the feeling that Frank was lurking just behind the scenes, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Let's get one thing straight," I began, my voice cutting through the silence, steady and unwavering. "Sterling Enterprises is not a battleground. It's a business, and I'm going to run it like one. Frank can make his moves, he can call in his favors. But I'm not going to let him tear this company apart." The board members exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsure of where to stand. Frank's supporters had been quiet in the past few days, but I knew they were still there, waiting for the right moment to pounce. I wasn't about to give them that opportunity. I had learned from Frank. I knew that if I hesitated, even for a moment, he would take advantage. I couldn't afford to give him that edge. "The evidence is clear," I continued, pulling the documents from the last meeting back onto the table, the ones that had exposed Frank's financial misconduct. "Frank has been stealing from this company. If you choose to stand with him, you're choosing to ignore the truth. You're choosing to ignore what's best for this company." I could feel the pressure building as I looked around the room, locking eyes with the board members. Some were still loyal to Frank, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They had seen the evidence. They knew what had happened. And now, they had to decide whether they would back a man who had built an empire on lies and corruption, or stand with the person who had actually made the company what it was today. I could see Frank's loyalists trying to play it cool, but I knew they were nervous. Frank had always controlled the narrative, spun everything in his favor, but now, the tables had turned, and I wasn't going to let him have another chance. The stakes had never been higher, and I could feel the weight of it all pressing on me. The room felt like it was closing in, the tension almost suffocating. I knew that the outcome of this meeting would determine everything, whether I would maintain control, or whether Frank would claw his way back to the top. The silence stretched on as the board members shifted in their seats. I could hear the soft shuffle of papers, the tapping of pens on the table, but no one spoke. I was waiting for someone to make a move, waiting for someone to take a stand. And then, Richard, one of Frank's most loyal board members, finally spoke up. "You're asking us to turn our backs on a man who built this company," Richard said, his voice heavy with doubt. "Frank's been with us from the start. We can't just throw him out." I leaned forward, my voice calm but firm. "No one's asking you to throw him out. What I'm asking is for you to choose the future of this company. We've built something great, something that doesn't belong to one man. It belongs to everyone in this room. But it can't continue if we allow corruption to fester at the top." The room was still, the air thick with tension. I could see some of the board members nodding, others still hesitant. Frank had done a good job of ingraining himself in the fabric of the company, of making people feel like they owed him something. But loyalty to Frank was no longer loyalty to the company, it was loyalty to a man who had made decisions that would destroy everything he had built. Richard looked down at the table, his expression unreadable. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He was a man caught between loyalty and truth. It wasn't an easy choice. But the truth was right there in front of him, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. "I don't want to see this company fall apart," Richard said finally, his voice low. "I'll stand with you." The room seemed to exhale collectively, as Richard's decision rippled through the group. One by one, the other board members spoke up, voicing their support for me, for the company, and for the future. Frank's influence was slipping away, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But just as I thought the battle was won, a voice spoke from the back of the room, cutting through the growing sense of victory. Olivia walked into the boardroom, her presence like a shadow falling over everything. She had been silent through all of this, but I knew she wasn't done yet. Her loyalty was torn between her father, the man who had raised her, and me, the man who had built her world. But in that moment, I wasn't sure what she wanted. She stood there for a moment, her eyes scanning the room, before she spoke, her voice steady, but carrying an edge I hadn't heard before. "I'm not here to pick sides," she said, her gaze meeting mine. "But if you think you can just throw away everything my father built, you're wrong." The room fell silent again. I could feel the tension building, the moment hanging in the air like a loaded gun. Olivia had always been the obedient daughter, the one who followed her father's lead. But now, her loyalty was being tested in ways neither of us had anticipated. "I'm not throwing anything away," I said, my voice sharp. "I'm building something better. But I can't do it with people who think they can run this company from the shadows. And that includes you." The words stung more than I expected. But I couldn't let her play both sides anymore. She had made her choice, and now I was making mine. The silence in the room stretched on, the tension unbearable. For the first time, I saw her falter. The woman who had stood by Frank's side, the woman who had always been his ally, was no longer so sure of herself. "Do what you have to do," she said quietly, turning away without another word. And just like that, it was over. Frank had lost, Olivia had lost, and I had won. The moment Olivia left the room, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't just her departure, it was the realization that I had finally taken control, and the last lingering connection to Frank's empire was slipping away. I stood there, watching her walk out, but there was no turning back now. I had made my stand. The battle was shifting in my favor, and it wasn't just about business anymore, it was about the future of Sterling Enterprises, and who would define its path. The silence in the room stretched, but I wasn't waiting for approval anymore. I wasn't waiting for anyone's support. I had already won. I had the majority on my side, and that meant Frank was out. The game had changed, and I was the one holding the cards. I wasn't sure if Frank realized just how deep he was, and yet he had underestimated me. But that wasn't something I intended to let him forget. But before I could even process the victory, the door opened again. This time, it wasn't Olivia, it was a message, carried in by one of my most trusted executives. She stepped forward with a file in hand, a serious expression on her face. The last few hours had been a blur, but now, everything seemed to stop in an instant. She placed the file on my desk, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled with urgency. "Frank's making his move," she said, her words hitting me like a punch. "He's not just sitting back. He's gathering allies from the outside, investors, stakeholders who've been in his corner for years. He's planning a full-scale counterattack." I felt a chill run down my spine as I flipped through the file. The names on the pages weren't surprising. Frank's longtime allies, those who had stood by him through thick and thin, were circling. It was exactly what I had expected, but still, the timing caught me off guard. He wasn't backing down, not now. He was throwing everything he had into this, pulling in anyone who might be swayed by his power, his money, and his influence. I couldn't afford to be caught off guard, not when the stakes were this high. Frank's plan was simple: destabilize, fracture, and divide. He was going to attack my credibility, trying to create doubt in the board, doubt in the employees, and doubt in the people who had put their trust in me. He would take every inch of power I'd worked so hard for, and try to rip it away from me. He was betting on fear, betting that the fear of his wrath would push people back to his side. I knew this was coming, but seeing it laid out in front of me made it all the more real. Frank wasn't just trying to regain control, he was preparing for a war. And this time, I wasn't going to fight him just for the company. I was going to fight him to make sure no one ever doubted me again. "What's the play?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. "We strike first," she said, her tone filled with a mix of determination and concern. "We can't let him get the upper hand. If we move fast, we can neutralize the damage before it spreads. The moment we give him a foothold, it's over. This needs to be handled now." I stood up, my mind already racing through strategies, analyzing every angle. I wasn't going to let Frank take everything from me. Not now. Not after everything I had sacrificed to get here. I had been methodical, patient. I knew his tactics, his weaknesses, and most importantly, I knew what he feared. He feared being exposed, being left with nothing. And I was ready to give him exactly that. I walked to the window, staring out at the city below. It had been my city, my empire. And I wasn't about to let anyone take it from me, not Frank, not Olivia, no one. I had worked too hard, too long. The road had been long, and I had paid a price to get here. But now that I was here, I was going to finish what I started. "We need to act fast," I said, turning back to face my executive. "Prepare the team. We'll go public with the evidence. We'll expose Frank for what he is, everything he's done. All the lies, the manipulation, the theft. I want everything on the table. It's time for him to face the consequences." She nodded, her expression resolute. "I'll get everything ready." The next few hours were a blur of action. I met with key members of the legal team, laid out the strategy, and made sure every document was in order. Frank's plan to destabilize me was in motion, but I wasn't going to let him pull the strings. We were going to take the fight to him. We were going to hit him where it hurt most, his reputation. By 3:00 p.m., we were ready. I made the call to have everything prepared for a public release. The media would be our ally. Frank had thought he could control the narrative, but now the narrative would be ours. We were going to expose him for the fraud he was. I wasn't just going to win this battle. I was going to make sure no one ever forgot how I dismantled his empire. I watched the news unfold as the reports started to hit the airwaves. The articles, the videos, the social media posts, everything started to come together. Frank's crimes, his manipulation, his theft, every detail of his secret dealings was now public knowledge. His reputation was crumbling faster than I had imagined. It wasn't just a business war anymore. This was personal, and I was going to make sure Frank never had a place at the table again. But even as the victory felt within my grasp, I knew I had to stay vigilant. Frank was still out there, still trying to rally support, still trying to salvage whatever shred of power he could. He was no stranger to fighting dirty. But I was done with playing by the rules. I was done letting him control the game. By the time the news had fully spread, I was already preparing for the next step. I knew Frank would come after me, but I was ready. I had the proof, the support, and the strength to finish this once and for all. The game wasn't over, not yet. But Frank had no idea just how much of it I had already won. I walked into the office the next morning, more determined than ever. The city outside was quiet. But inside, I was preparing for the storm that was about to hit. Frank had underestimated me, and now, I was going to show him just how far he had pushed me. I had fought to get here, and I wasn't going to let him take it from me. Not now. Not ever. The world seemed to slow down in the hours that followed. The relentless buzz of activity, the reporters circling the company, the legal team scrambling to handle the fallout, it all blurred into a singular focus. I was at the center of it all, sitting behind the desk in my office, my hands clasped in front of me. Steady, but never truly calm. My empire had been threatened, torn apart, and now, I was picking up the pieces. The battle was far from over. Frank's destruction had just begun, and with every move, he made it clear that he wasn't going to give up easily. But neither was I. The release of the evidence had sent shockwaves through the business world. Media outlets picked up the story faster than I had anticipated, and the public turned on Frank in a way I hadn't expected. His once glorious reputation, built over decades, was crumbling before his eyes. For every loyal executive, every lawyer he had paid to protect him, there were 100 voices, louder and angrier than ever, calling for his downfall. The moment I had dreamed of had arrived. Frank was being exposed for the fraud he was. But the moment I had anticipated for so long wasn't as satisfying as I thought it would be. I expected a rush of exhilaration, a sense of victory as the media spun their stories, as people turned away from him, as my name was mentioned alongside the words new leadership and the future of Sterling Enterprises. But there was something hollow in it. Frank's empire was falling, but he wasn't out yet. And I knew he wouldn't go down without a fight. I spent that evening in my office, a sense of unease gnawing at me as I watched the news. Frank wasn't done, I knew that much. He had already gone underground, preparing for his next move. He'd underestimated me once, he wouldn't make that mistake again. But what he didn't know was that I had no intention of giving him any breathing room. This fight was far from over. The next morning, I walked into the office early, the stillness in the air telling me that something wasn't right. Danielle was already there, working through the pile of files that had accumulated over the past few days. She looked up when I walked in, her expression grave. "They're pushing back," she said quietly, before I could even ask. "Frank's getting desperate. He's trying to rally investors, promising them that if they stand by him, they'll be part of the new leadership. He's trying to keep his grip on the company any way he can. The media's already questioning your stability. They're digging into every move you've made. And some people are starting to listen to him again." I clenched my jaw, the frustration threatening to spill over. "He's trying to buy his way back in," I said, my voice cold. "But I won't let him. We've already shown the world what he really is. And I won't let him poison this company any longer." Danielle nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "We need to move fast. If we give him any time to maneuver, we'll lose the momentum we've built. We've got the board on our side, but if they see any sign of weakness, some of them might go back to him." I could feel the clock ticking in my head. The next move had to be precise. It had to be powerful enough to knock Frank off his feet for good. To make sure that no one would ever doubt who was in charge of Sterling Enterprises. I wasn't going to let this end with Frank simply slinking back into the shadows. No, I would make sure his fall was public, undeniable, and final. I walked into the conference room, the weight of the decisions ahead pressing down on me. Every person in this room could either make or break everything I had worked for. Some were loyal to me, some were loyal to Frank, but all of them would have to choose a side. It was time to end this. "We've exposed him for what he is," I began, my voice low but filled with the kind of intensity that demanded their attention. "But now it's time to make sure this company never has to deal with him again. We need to go on the offensive. We need to show Frank that his time is over. We need to make sure that no one ever doubts the future of this company." I looked around the table, making eye contact with every board member. They were still tense, unsure of which direction to take. Some were watching me with a glint of loyalty, while others were still waiting for the other shoe to drop. But I wasn't going to give them the chance to waver. Frank has always been a master of manipulation, I said. But we have the truth on our side. We have everything we need to ensure that Sterling Enterprises moves forward without him. He can try to rally his allies, but he won't succeed. We're going to hit him where it hurts his reputation, his name, and everything he's built. And we're going to do it in a way that leaves no room for him to recover. The silence that followed felt suffocating. The board members knew the implications of what I was saying. They knew what was at stake. If they hesitated, if they let Frank back in, they could lose everything. The tension was palpable, thick enough to choke anyone who wasn't strong enough to handle it. But I wasn't going to back down. I had already made my decision, and now it was time for them to do the same. I want everything laid out, I continued, my eyes scanning the room. We're going to make the facts public, no more half measures. Frank has manipulated the truth for too long. Now it's time for him to face the consequences. Get the media involved, get the lawyers involved, but make sure every detail of his fraudulent dealings is exposed to the public. There's no turning back now. We need to make sure that this company's future is ours, and we're going to do it without Frank's shadow hanging over us. The team nodded, understanding the magnitude of the task ahead. This wasn't just about power, it was about control. And I wasn't about to let anyone take that from me. By 3:00 p.m., the first wave of action had been set into motion. The legal team was working tirelessly to ensure that the board had all the evidence they needed to support my claim. The media was briefed, and reports were being written about Frank's financial misconduct. The public was being primed for the truth, and there was no turning back now. Every move was calculated. Every step was designed to ensure that Frank's legacy was destroyed, and that Sterling Enterprises would rise from the ashes, stronger than ever. But as the day wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that Frank wasn't done. He wasn't finished yet. He would try one last time to claw his way back into the company, and when he did, I would be ready. That night, I sat in my office, the quiet hum of the city filling the space around me. I had taken back control, but I knew that nothing was ever certain in this game. Frank had spent his life building his reputation, and I knew he wasn't going to let it go without a fight. But I wasn't afraid. I had come too far to turn back now. The battle was over, but the war was far from done, and I was ready to finish it. In the end, I wasn't just fighting for the company. I was fighting for everything I had sacrificed, everything I had worked for, and everything I had earned. This wasn't just a win, it was a declaration. I was taking back what was mine, and no one, not even Frank, could take it from me again. Unbelievable, right? After all that betrayal, can anyone truly recover from something like this? But the real question is, will his revenge be as satisfying as he hopes? The twists and turns in this story are far from over. So, what do you think happens next? Do you think he'll rise above it all, or will Frank find a way to claw back into power? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's see what you would do in his shoes. You won't believe the shocking conclusion. Stay tuned. The story shows the power of resilience and the importance of standing firm in the face of betrayal. In America, success isn't just about achieving goals, it's about maintaining integrity. Especially when faced with adversity. Life can throw obstacles your way. But like the protagonist, you must be prepared to fight for what's rightfully yours. Trust is essential, but loyalty should never blind you to the truth. When the system is rigged, you have to challenge it with strategic thinking, hard work, and determination. Never back down. Protect your legacy, because no one can take away what you've built, unless you let them.